This book is called Paddington by Michael Bond, James Bond. But first, to talk about some things, Paddington lives in England. So let me show you a few things. This behind me here, that's the flag of the United Kingdom. So that includes England. So that's what you see when you look at the Queen and when you look at London, and that's where the story takes place. So I thought it would be appropriate to show you some tea. And all right, so I'm going to have some lovely Yorkshire tea. Yorkshire, that's one of the most popular brands of tea in England. And to make the tea, it's not tea bags like we see. It's like these little pouches that you can actually put in the teapot or in your teacup without a string. And you just put it in there, stir it around with hot water, and then pour it in the teacup. Paddington loves tea. We'll show about that later. So I've got some tea, and I also want to show you something else. Paddington loves marmalade. That means it's kind of a jelly made of oranges. So I'll show you what that kind of looks like on the inside, kind of like that. That's his favorite food. All right, so let me get a sip of tea here, and that's good. And let's start talking about the story of Paddington. All right. Here's the first page. The family is at the train station. People take trains a lot in England. Mr. and Mrs. Brown first met Paddington on a railway platform. That means train station. In fact, that was how he came to have such an unusual name for a bear, because Paddington was the name of the station. The Browns were waiting to meet their daughter, Judy, when Mr. Brown noticed something small and furry near the left luggage office. That means lost luggage. "It looks like a bear," he said. "A bear?" repeated Mrs. Brown. "In Paddington Station? Don't be silly, Henry. There can't be." But Mr. Brown was right. It was sitting on an old leather suitcase marked "Wanted on Voyage." That means take this on the trip. And as they drew near, it stood up and politely raised its hat. "Good afternoon," it said. "May I help you?" "It's very kind of you," said Mr. Brown, "but as a matter of fact, we were wondering if we could help you." "You're a very small bear," said Mrs. Brown. "Where are you from?" The bear looked around carefully before replying. "Darkest Peru. I'm not really supposed to be here at all. I'm a stowaway." A stowaway means a person who got on the trip but didn't pay for a ticket, sneaking on. "You don't mean to say you've come all the way from South America on your own?" exclaimed Mrs. Brown. "Whatever did you do for food?" Unlocking the suitcase, the bear took out an almost empty glass jar. "I ate marmalade." Bears like marmalade. Mrs. Brown looked at the label around the bear's neck. It said quite simply, "Please look after this bear. Thank you." Someone wrote a note asking people to take care of him. "Oh, Henry, we can't leave him here all by himself. There's no knowing what might happen to him. Can't he come home and stay with us?" "Stay with us?" repeated Mr. Brown nervously. He looked down at the bear. Would you like that? He asked. That is, he added hastily, if you have nothing else planned. Oh, yes, replied the bear. I would like that very much. I've nowhere to go, and everyone seems in such a hurry. Well, that settles it, said Mrs. Brown. Now, you must be very thirsty after your journey. Mr. Brown can get you some tea while I go and meet our daughter Judy. But Mary, said Mr. Brown, we don't even know its name. Mrs. Brown thought for a moment. I know. We'll call him Paddington, after the station. Paddington. The bear tested it several times to make sure. Paddington, Paddington. It sounds very important. Mr. Brown tried it out next. Follow me, Paddington. I'll take you to the snack bar. They're going to go get some tea. I like mine sweet with sugar. Oh boy, look at this at the snack bar. Oh man. Oh, and his foot's so close to his teacup, that might not do very well. Mr. Brown was as good as his word. Paddington had never seen so many snacks on one tray, and he didn't know which one to try first. He was so hungry and thirsty that he climbed up onto the table to get a better look. Mr. Brown turned away, pretending he had tea with a bear at Paddington Station every day of his life. Henry, cried Mrs. Brown when she arrived with Judy, what are you doing to that poor bear? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Paddington jumped up to raise his hat, and in his haste, he slipped on a strawberry tart, skidded on the cream, and fell over backward into his cup of tea. Oh, no. Oh, no. I think we'd better go before anything else happens, said Mr. Brown. Judy took hold of Paddington's paw. Come along, she said. We'll take you home and you can meet Mrs. Bird and my brother Jonathan. Jonathan! Look at the lady cleaning it up. Oh boy. Oh my gosh. Oh. Mr. Brown led the way to a waiting taxi. Number 32 Windsor Gardens, please, he said. The driver stared at Paddington. Bears is extra, he growled. Sticky bears is twice as much. And make sure none of it comes off in my taxi. It was clean when I set out this morning. The sun was shining as they drove out of the station, and there were cars and big red buses everywhere. In London, look, they have buses that have 2 levels. You can be on the top level and look at everything. Paddington waved to some people waiting at a bus stop, and several of them waved back. It was all very friendly. Paddington tapped the taxi driver on his shoulder. It isn't a bit like Darkest Peru, he announced. The man jumped at the sound of Paddington's voice. Cream, he said bitterly. Cream and jam all over my coat. He slid the little window behind him shut. Oh dear Henry, murmured Mrs. Brown. I wonder if we're doing the right thing. Fortunately, before anyone had time to answer, they arrived at Windsor Gardens, and Judy helped Paddington onto the pavement. Now you're going to meet Mrs. Bird, she said. She looks after us. She's a bit fierce at times, but she doesn't really mean it. I'm sure you'll like her. Paddington felt his knees begin to wobble. I'm sure I shall, if you say so, he replied. The thing is, will she like me? There's Mrs. Bird in the window. Oh, what do you think she's thinking? They're bringing home a bear. What? Goodness gracious, exclaimed Mrs. Bird. What have you got there? It's not a what, said Judy. It's a bear called Paddington, and he's coming to stay with us. A bear, said Mrs. Bird, as Paddington raised his hat. Well, he has good manners, I'll say that for him. I'm afraid I stepped on a jam tart by mistake, said Paddington. I can see that, said Mrs. Bird. You'd better have a bath before you're very much older. Judy can turn it on for you. I dare say you'll be wanting some marmalade too. I think she likes you, whispered Judy. See? How did she know he likes marmalade? Paddington had never been in a bathroom before. While the water was running, he made himself at home. First of all, he tried writing his new name on the steam on the mirror. Then he used Mr. Brown's shaving cream to draw a map of Peru on the floor. I don't think that's a very good idea either. It wasn't until a drip landed on his head that he remembered what he was supposed to be doing. He soon discovered that getting into a bath is one thing, but it's quite another matter getting out again, especially when it's full of soapy water. Did they leave him in there by himself? Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Paddington tried calling out, "Help!" At first in a quiet voice so as not to disturb anyone, then very loudly, "Help! Help!" And when that didn't work, he began bailing the water out with his hat. But the hat had several holes in it, and the map of Peru soon turned into a sea of foam. Help! Oh no! Suddenly, Jonathan and Judy burst into the bathroom and lifted a dripping Paddington onto the floor. So there's Judy, and there's her brother Jonathan. There's Paddington. Oh man, look at the suds. Oh no. Thank goodness you're all right, said Judy. We heard you calling out. Fancy making such a mess, said Jonathan admiringly. You should have pulled the plug out. Oh, said Paddington, I never thought of that. When Paddington came downstairs, he looked so clean that nobody could possibly be cross with him. Look how clean and fluffy he is. Oh boy, and he smells good too. His fur was all soft and silky, his nose gleamed, and his paws had lost all traces of the German cream. The Browns made room for him in a small armchair, and Mrs. Bird brought him a pot of tea and a plate of hot buttered toast and marmalade. Hey, look. His teapot is just like mine. Same. More tea. Time for more tea. He's having some, so I shall as well. Okay. Have a sip. Very good. Now, said Mrs. Brown, you must tell us all about yourself. I'm sure you must have had lots of adventures. There's Paddington having some tea and getting ready to tell his story. "I have," said Paddington earnestly. "Things are always happening to me. I'm that sort of bear." He settled back into the armchair. "I was brought up by my Aunt Lucy in darkest Peru." Let's see. Peru? Hey, I have that right here on the map. Can you see it? Let's see if I can show you. Here's America. Oh, now I got to bring it over a little bit more. No. All right. I'll have to show you in a minute. "I was brought up by my Aunt Lucy in darkest Peru," he began. "But she had to go into a home for retired bears in Lima." He closed his eyes thoughtfully, and a hush fell over the room as everyone waited expectantly. Look at them listening to his story. Even Judy and Jonathan. After a while, when nothing happened, they began to get restless. Mr. Brown tried coughing. Then he reached across and poked Paddington. "Oh, well, I never," he said. "I do believe he's fast asleep." "After all that's happened to him," said Mrs. Brown. "Is it any wonder?" Oh, look at him. And that's the end of the first book, but there are many Paddington books. We'll try to get them for our library. The end.